bringing the light of the divine to past life regression therapy. And without further ado, Greg McHugh.
Okay. I've been practicing this time for 12 years, 13 years, something like that, in Denver. I have a mixed background, like a lot of us, and probation officer, Gestalt therapy student, you know, drugs, lots of good drugs years ago, and psychedelic kind, of course, and meditation and training with people that were real characters at the time and outrageous, who demonstrated a kind of like let it be, let yourself be in the event with the patient, client, and yourself, and allow things to happen. These were my Gestalt mentors, although one of them was very controlling. The others were not. And then I had lots of experiences where I was seeking to connect inside. Lived in the woods in the Sierras for 3 years with a dog, a few cats. And the spiritual community I was in for 9 years, which changed my life forever. And if I get a little mushy here and there, it's because it brings up feelings that I have about it all. And when I was in that community, I started doing healing work for people remotely. It was just part of the job, kind of. We had a place where we did that, a chapel, and where we would go, and there was a so-called prayer list, and those of us who were involved in that part of the work would sit and go into deep meditation and then do remote healing for people, seeing them well and whole. Then I had a life where I had a career out in the world for 18 years and did public policy consulting, children's programs, and domestic violence funding legislation, child welfare legislation, child abuse laws, stuff like that. In '88, I had a healing experience in regression therapy around my anger, and that was transformative. And it was with a person that had studied alchemical hypnotherapy. Some of you familiar with that?
Is that
You know,
David Quigley?
Yeah, David Quigley. So later I trained with him and Shantamo or Nick Ardaw. He's got another third or fourth name now. And so I studied a whole gamut, basics of hypnosis and so on. Never thought I'd use it. I just thought I was going to be doing this consulting and lobbying stuff forever, which I was good at and I loved doing it and so on. And then remarried in 94 or 5, and then eventually left all that in 98 and went, I'm just going to go and study some more hypnotherapy and do a little stock trading and kind of take it easy, and, you know. Well, I made money and then I lost it, and meantime I was learning all these other tools, and I entered into this realm where I got really excited. And I was mentioning this last night about, you know, feeling this charge in my heart around some of these tools that I was learning. And sorry, I won't do this again, I promise. And but it was a charge. It was like pressure coming in through the heart, and then experiencing and understanding that was coming out through it. So one of the tools that I'll talk about, actually there were two people whose work I studied that are really kind of instrumental in how I work now. One was a process called core transformation. Anybody familiar with that? Oh, you ought to look it up. It's a book by that name, Core Transformation, Connie Ray Andreas, Andreas. And she and her sister, Tamara, wrote the book, and I think they're both still training, or at least Tamara is, she's much younger. Connie Ray is a psychologist, lives in Boulder. Her husband, Steve, was they were really both in the foundation groups in NLP years ago, studying Erickson and all those people. So in this protocol, Connie Ray would take a part, or as you might know, subpersonality. People understand the language I'm speaking? You know, something that's created out of trauma in a person where they end up with a field of energy and a belief associated with that. And the part might be anger, you know, it could be anything. Fear, I need to protect myself, mistrust of others, and, you know, anything at all that, as a therapist, you would run into with a client or a patient. Then she did the most amazing thing. She would take this part and say to the client, and they would be standing up in the demonstration, eyes wide open, and she would say, well, just call this part forward and let me know when you've done that. So they would do that, and then you could feel it, and then welcome it. So they would do that privately inside, and then she would say, now what do you notice? And 90% of the time there was a shift in the client's sense of the energy in themselves and with the part. Let's say if it was anger, they might experience some lightening of that anger, just a little, but noticeable. And then she would say, all right, now ask this part what it wants. So it might say something like peace, love. This is an angry part we're talking to. And it would come up with these responses that had nothing to do with anger, but were genuine, and each one would be a progressively higher state of consciousness that it wanted to experience, this part wanted to experience. So she would say, well, ask the part to imagine having love. And so the part would imagine it, and the client standing there would start to feel it. Now just breathe that feeling in and out through your whole body, head to toe, and the person you'd watch, and there'd be this lightening and expansiveness happening in them. Thank the part for that experience. Pause. A thank you. Ask it what it wants. After that, union with God or something. I mean, these are not, little minor experiences. So people started entering into brief but solid states of enlightenment, higher states, into states of union. So the person would be standing there in the room with their eyes wide open and in a high altered state. So that's what I would call a state that was in accord with their true being, with the capital S self, God within. Any name is good enough, but you get the drift. So how did this happen? Well, we could go into explanations, but they're not as important as what comes next. So then she said, now ask the part, this is an abbreviated form of her protocol, ask the part to show you the first experience of itself, anger. So the part is 3 years old, child, this life, inner child, angry, pissed off, I'm making this up, say, watching his sister being beaten up by his father. Rage, anger, it's all there. Feel it, be in the feeling. Now, when I count to 3, this higher state that you were just in, we're going to call that in to that experience. Totally transmuted it. Whew. Not there. Anger not there. Child who's witnessing it is safe automatically, perfectly. The sister is safe. And the father, say, shrinks in size and walks away. So the whole trauma event, the whole field of it, including the anger and beliefs that might have been associated with it, like I'm not safe or you can't trust adults or any of those that you might normally come across in working with a client, were gone. Now, Connie Ray goes on to do other work that I don't do. But that, when I saw that, here's this higher state resource coming into a trauma event, I went, whoa, this is big. And mind you, I'd already been trained in regression work. So I was thinking, well, we could do this in regression. So then I started reading Jack Elias. Anybody know Jack? Good guy. He's written a great manual. He has another book out or coming. He's a longtime Buddhist.
Can you spell that last name?
Elias, like the prophet. And so Jack's book is called Finding True Magic. And it's really a great foundational piece for anybody going into the field. He writes in a kind of manner that, you know, it's a little bit exhausting sometimes to read his, you know, like stream of consciousness intermittently, although he's done some editing in his latest version. But his charge is to bring you into leaving your own head and coming into an understanding that's different than just intellectual. And sometimes that happens when you read his material. So he was talking about that same principle about using higher state resources. So I went, whoa. So I started going in, using that in my work. And that's really the basic principle. And so in my book, which is, I don't know if there are any left, I have more upstairs, but everything that I talk about, this is my aid here, everything that I talk about today is in the book, and of course a lot more, and there are detailed protocols for how-tos, how to do it, and so on. So let's take a session, kind of a model session, and I'll show you the areas that I bring in divine presence or light or the presence of a divine being or a higher state in as a resource, and show you what takes place. So in regression work, I'm very non-directive. And these are all like premises that I operate on. I don't make any assumptions about what the cause of the problem is or where the client needs to go. I do involve facilitating catharsis if it's ready to happen. So I use all the tools that I stole, so to speak, from my Gestalt mentors for that, so that we can magnify the experiences in the body. And being in the feelings, you know, clients will say, well, I feel lousy, or I'm not really happy today, and, you know, that's just bunk. They're not really in it. I'm not really happy, that's what's not happening, you know, things like that. So I'll just say, well, see if you can be in the body in that life. You know, we're walking down the street in London, and notice the heart and the throat and the belly. I have to bring them back. So I use tools like that a lot. And then I'll use tools to have them deepen into those experiences, however mundane they may seem, or even how profound they may be, because there is always more to be arrived at, more insights to be had by deepening into the feeling process in the body. Most of you know that. So then generally, as you know, if you're doing a regression back to cause, you'll be at some point in the life that's causal for this theme that you're addressing for the client. And then I eventually will have them go back to the womb, be in the womb, experience how the mom is doing, good, bad. If she's in a bad state, how does that affect you? What's the impact on you? Feel that. It's always different, as some of you probably know. When you do that kind of inquiry in the regression, you know, how are you doing in the womb? Oh, it's lovely and I'm floating. And how's your mom? She's not present. She's really so preoccupied with the other 5 kids, she has no time for me. Oh, how does that feel? Well, I have a hole in my heart, which is different than just floating along. See? Okay, so then we'll go through other trauma. Let's say that the theme is abandonment, and we're going to bring healing to that field, that theme. Now, you'll notice I use the word field. That brings us to one of the foundations of how I approach this. The Hindu term.
This one is a,
Oh, this is a.
we get fancy here, you know?
Oh, wow.
There you go.
Gee, retractable.
Watch out for the sharp end.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody familiar with this term?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is a Hindu term that's predominant in the Upanishads, and it means an impression on the soul caused by a negative egoic fear-based experience associated with a belief. So now this teacher that I work with calls it an energetic signature. Same thing. I used to call it an attraction field with belief. Sounds like a menu. And so the sanskaras are the impressions that we've made upon our souls by looking at events that are real bad and fearful. They could be anything, but they are not based on love, because love moves naturally, has no impression except in the relationship experiences of the soul. So coming out of, let's just call this the Godhead, just for fun, okay? Yay for Godheads. Any other Godheads here? So there's the point, this is common experience under hypnotherapy. Maybe you've taken some of your clients back to this place. If you haven't, take yourself back first. See what it's like. See what happens to you and what you create when you come out. So it's reported in different ways, but in the beginning, there's hardly any self-identity when in the place of the Godhead. It's all union. You could say this is before the Garden of Eden, metaphorically. So when the soul is sent out, that's emergence out, and then it goes, whoa, oh fuck. You know? And it's either scared or pissed off or taking it personal. But the divine that has sent it out on its mission is not treating it with any kind of negativity or, personally sending it away without any support or love or anything like that. that, as you know, the self is still inside. And when self says, I never left you, it's not kidding. But our perception is, in this case, we'll just call it the big A, which is abandonment. I remember when I did my regression back to this place and coming out, and I went, well, there's nothing here. Well, I'll have to create something. And so I did. I created a universe. We all do that. And then I could identify with it. I gave meaning to my universe. That's what we all do on a daily basis, or when we left, quote, past tense, we did that in some way. Now, some of us have different responses in regression work. You know, we're angry or we're forlorn. One soul, one that I was working with the other day, we had to do reconstruction. This was an amazing experience, but there was such a gap that took place in this one when it left that parts of it were shattered out in its fear-based orientation, so it caused a huge energetic dispersion of soul parts. So we had to call those back. I use angels to do that. Angels of the white light. It's very specific, not just any angels. Somebody who read my book, a friend of mine actually, was very critical because, oh, you can't trust angels. They could be bad. Or your clients will become dependent on them. Anyhow, she had a different view of it than I did. So others will have different experiences. Yours will be unique. You can do it by yourself. Just put yourself into trance, self-hypnosis, and say to your teachers, your guides, take me back to the point of emergence, prior to emergence, and see what that feels like in you. And then let's see what comes next, you know, when you're doing regression work, and what happens next. Or I say, when I count to 3, you'll come to the next event. Count to 3, see what happens. I think everybody in the room has the spiritual and emotional maturity and groundedness. They could do this on their own. If not, have someone take you there. So anyhow, so this is leaving presence and leaving the sense of connectedness with self, very important element. So then the sanskaras are this lifetime, that lifetime, this one, this one, this one, where negative, we'll just use this very weird looking symbol, negative fear-based orientations happen, and Yogananda uses the metaphor of the movie, and you know that it's an imprint upon the film for the movie, and the light in you is the projection light. You're the projector, and this is your movie. I had experience one time. They always come in the shower for some reason, and you too? Yeah. Well, it's easier for guidance, I think, when we're in that water. So, and they showed me how the whole universe, this is out as far as that telescope can figure out that the universe, what's it, Hubble, and beyond that, out to infinity, and that everything between there, even George Bush, the war in Iraq, everything was right here. Not out there, but it was like they defined a perimeter around me, like that, and with the very comforting words, and it's very fitting, you know, which is not encouraging, but puts you in the driver's seat in terms of responsibility. Okay, so I'm digressing a little. All right, so now the purpose of the sanskaras is self-evident, like that part was that I just went through that description of using core transformation, is to take us back to the self. Sounds weird, but there is that resource in there. And as you know, if you work with a client, you're going to some theme that they're experiencing in themselves, that eventually their working with you will lead them back into some realization about how they really are, that they're safe, that they are well, that they are healed, that they are whole. That is the potential, the full potential of the work. So it is like clearing the sanskaras. So if you clear the impressions that are on the soul that create all these lifetimes, what are you left with? The self. Okay? Now, it used to be in Hinduism anyhow, right? Yeah.
So you're saying that as you clear those, you're removing the illusion of the self as different, or we have this sort of illusion of being disconnected.
Yes, separate.
Being separate, and so as you're clearing those, that illusion goes away. Am I understanding you right?
Yes, that's correct. And I guess I need to define the self. Would that help some? The self is the God being inside us. He said the kingdom's inside. He didn't say except some of you, or only on Tuesdays, or, it's like the whole thing is right there. So in the emergence out, we come into a state of believing we're separate, hence bodies. Well, you're you, Charlie. I can tell that because you have a body and I have a different one, right? So most of us know about the spiritual comprehension of unity, that we're all connected, okay? In the sanskaras, there is separateness. There are all the things that are manifest in our world collectively by our collective consciousness of experiences that we've created, impressions on the soul, on the film, and then the light inside of us, unbeknownst to ourselves, shines out, projects out the movie that we have to see for that lifetime and for the other lifetimes, and we act as if they're real. And given the emotions that we have attached to those impressions, they sure seem real. Okay, so the tradition has been that the only way to truly clear these out is with a teacher, some big teacher. Well, that's almost, if you'll pardon, it's a word I haven't used in a long time, Piscean. It's like you had to go to a guru who is here on earth, which is usually a good thing, but that was the only way that you could realize the self again without all the other stuff in the way. And, I'm sorry? Well, I'm sorry. It's too late.
So now you're using the Hansel and Gretel, I'm joking, but if you're tracking the samskaras get you back to the true self. In a way, it's like a little trail that you leave for yourself.
Yes, and you're clearing them. So you can see and feel and be in the self, veil by veil removed. So given that, for the return then, what does it take to clearly and thoroughly do such a clearing? It takes something that has the consciousness of that which you want to return to. So it would be something in accord with the self, which would be white light of pure being, the light that you encounter upon death, that you encounter in the interlife, that shines across the heaven worlds. It would be the light that comes from true higher state beings In the spiritual realm, it would be the light that comes from true beings here who are in a body. And so that is the key. That's what I learned from Connie Ray Andreas. That the sanskara of the child who was witnessing that abuse of sister by the father was transmuted and totally cleared out. You'll have to forgive me, there was no rescripting. There was no reframing of anything. It was just the higher state coming in to the trauma that was being refelt, that was very difficult, and as soon as you counted to 3 to bring that in, totally gone. It's as if, and this is reported to me a lot, it never happened. It never happened at all. There's a book by a guy who was one of the kind of prophets of the Course in Miracles, Gary Renard. He's written a couple of books, and he's very hokey to read. He's not good at jokes. He thinks he's funny, and he's not. But a lot of his stuff is, you know?
Yeah, I've seen him speak before too.
I'm sorry?
I've seen him speak live. And
Oh,
it's the
okay.
same way.
Yeah. But he wrote a book that has a great title, and I reference it in mine because it's great. And it's called The Disappearance of the Universe. And that is what happens when you clear out the universes that you've created out of your fear-based orientation. So when people go through regression work in this approach that I use, and then eventually, and I'll describe this, they come to experiencing divine presence and clarifying or realizing the truths of what they were doing and so forth. And then you bring that divine presence that they're in back to those events. And you don't rescript, you don't go, well, now how would you like to rewrite this movie? You just say, how are you now? Given this presence with you, this light from the interlife that you were just bathing in 2 seconds ago. What's happening in the womb now as you carry this back with you? Oh, well, not only is it soft and fluid and warm, Mom is good and she loves me and she's conscious and she's with me. Well, okay, that's wonderful. So be in that. And what about the events that took place in your first visit to this life where you were terrorized or beaten or, some horrible things happened to you? They don't happen. They're not there. I can't even make them up. They're gone. And so what is your life like? Now, I try to be careful not to encourage rational mind reconstruction. It's not that it's of no value, I just don't do that. I don't approach it that way. So they will, let's say that there was abandonment. You would get one like this. Okay, so let's just say that it's abandoned, the theme is abandonment. And rejection, that's what the client comes in with. And in this life, so I made it into verbs. In this life, they describe that their parents were both alcoholic. They had no capacity for loving them and so forth. And of course, in their relationships when they were growing up, all their best friends left them. Their spouse left them, their girlfriends or boyfriends left them, this pattern of being abandoned or rejected. And we're going back to the primary root cause of this, to that sanskara for that field, okay, that energetic signature. I'm not worthy of being loved. I can never have an enduring relationship. I can't trust people that say they love me. All those. If you've done this work for a little while, those are common statements. I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. So you're back there, and you say, you know, in the regression, we'll go back to the root cause, just describe your awareness when the next 1, 2, 3, and they're back, and it's 3 years old, and their parents are fighting and beating each other up, and they're in terror. They don't think they can survive, and the mom is in jeopardy. She may be killed by the father, and all that. Then the relationships they have in that life, this life, relationships were replication of that causal life in this model. So then, eventually, by being in the events in that life and feeling them and deepening into the feelings and the feeling awareness is so important. I can't underline it enough. If you don't do that, do it, and then do it more. And a simple tool for that is the client is in an experience, let's say, that just learning they're 5 years old and their parents were killed in the war, and you know, like that, and they're having feelings of lost. Who will care for us? There's no one that can love us. There's no safety in the world. And you say, now in the body, how are you noticing what you're feeling in the heart and the throat and the belly? And they say, well, I just feel this hole in my heart and all this anxiety in my stomach. And then you say, okay, now ask your higher self to magnify your awareness of that feeling in the heart, the hole in the heart. And something more always comes. More insight comes. Like, I can never be loved. I can never, you know, like more beliefs that are associated with that experience start to show up. Okay? So all this is processing that's happening, and then, so we go through that life and then into the death experience. Death is often very critical. It's a very stable thing here. You know what that means. That's death, right? Okay. So also the death experience, there can be critical events that take place after that, let alone in it. Always feeling as much as possible in that. Sometimes very difficult emotional experiences take place upon leaving the body that the person was not allowing themselves to have awareness of while in the body. Anyhow, so then we go, when they process that, now all of this does not address spirit attachment. That's a whole, you know, it's another story entirely. But as you know, it's often a critical element in past lives, let alone in this one. Why would it be any different? So then they come into the interlife and the heaven worlds, and you want to make sure, of course, that they have an awareness of the presence of light in some way that indicates clearly to you that they've gotten there. Otherwise, of course, you're working with, if they never go there, then you're working with somebody else and not your client. You know, that's a spirit releasement principle. And so anyhow, they are in the light, and they talk about being welcomed and by people they've never seen before, and you know. And I have one client. He always goes to what he calls, it's the Akashic Library, but he calls it the Newton Library, after the scientist, you know, because it looks like that to him. And then eventually, I will get directive all of a sudden. Instead of being supportive at now, what you experience, what's it like, describe it for me. Now I say, when I count to 3, you'll be in the review period. In the review period, at least what I've seen is that the review period is not just where they look at that life and where you can also access vision of other lifetimes and other elements around that in the relationship. But this is where the distilling process takes place, where the soul ends up with their conclusions for that life that they carry forward as sanskaras into other lifetimes. Okay? Is this new to anybody or old? Or in between? Okay. All right, good. So in the review is where I bring in a divine presence in some way. There's a teacher that I work with, and his name is Elijah, and he goes by the label of Heart of Elijah because his presence is very heart-filled and pink. And so let's say that the person in this who was abandoned and rejected is in this field, and they're reviewing it, and there are all these great beings in the white light hanging out in the review room, and often there's a table, and common experiences held by people in regression. And all the other beings that are around are going, you really did a good job. It's not your fault what happened. You took it personally. You didn't have to feel abandoned or rejected. It doesn't matter. They still go, but I was. They're still carrying that, and they carry it into this life. So, but there are those around who are bright and say, no, you just need to turn it like that and you'll be okay. And they're going, I still feel this and it was my fault and so forth, and I'm not worthy of being loved. So there's this residue that eventually goes on to the soul, who knows time frame wise, prior to the next incarnation, that's carried forward until that soul addresses it in some other way, has another opportunity to learn and to heal, come into forgiveness of self, and others, all those things. So into this place, I bring divine presence. This is where one major area, and it's the same thing as the core transformation principle. We're bringing a higher state into that child that I described. This time I use Elijah to come in because he's so good at this. And when there's a stuck place, the impact of his presence, and someday we'll all learn how to do this, is that he causes it to be kind of turned inside out, and the person may go, there's a pause usually, like 10 seconds, a minute, a few minutes. You just sit and wait and just watch the client transform. Their whole visage, everything shifts and changes, and they get soft. Their coloring changes, and they say, oh, I've really been selfish about this. Oh, and I blamed my parents, and it wasn't their fault. But they're having this realization in here. It's not something in the head. It's an experience they're having. So then I have fun. Okay? I'm sorry? Well, it is fun because they don't know, but I do what's going to happen next. And most of the time I don't know. Okay? So after the review period, they're still in the interlife, and they've come through this shift in themselves and their perception of things, and the abandon issue is not there anymore. It's just not there. So let's give them a vacation. So I say, when I count to 3, you will just be in the light of God. Nothing else going on. And then they are. So 2 directives. One is to the review period, and the other is consciously calling, well, it's not a directive. I asked Elijah to come in. You could use other great beings also. You could use, Hindu gods that you trust, Christian. It's the principle of that presence being with them that causes a transmutation of the egoic perception of their experience. Then, in the light, they're just bathing in it. And they're in a high altered state. I had one client actually get pissed off at me because I brought her out too soon. It's not unusual for people to say, I don't want to leave this, ever. This is where, my home is, which is really in here, because they're still in my office, having the experience in the body on earth. And that's what we're here for. Okay? So they're experiencing the self through the metaphor of the light of God in the heaven worlds. Because they have greater capacity. The veil, or a veil, let's say, created by one of these Hummers is not there. So they can have that. Then we go, okay, now let's take this state of just how you are feeling right now in the light of God, it's really who you are, back to the womb and go back to that life and see what happens. Well, that's where it's a whole different paradigm. And they're just going, whoa. Now, let's say that in that lifetime, in the original version, they had experiences of relationships blowing up all over the place. And they ended up dying alone and embittered and angry and pissed off, and no one will ever love me, I could never have, And now we're not re-scripting, we're not saying what would it be like, we're just saying, what is it like now? And you grow up with the presence of this light with you, what happens? Well, I meet a guy when I'm 18, and we really love each other, and I don't experience that mistrust anymore. I can feel that I trust him, and he trusts me. And we get married, we have children, and she feels all of that. It's like in the body, in the chair, sitting there, in that life, redone by something that's in accord with divine presence or the self. This is how the God that we thought we had left would rather have us experience it. The self knows how to do that. Okay. I'll tell you a story. Need a little comedy in here. This client I was working with, very willful guy. And, he would just bash into China shops in his life and cause damage. But he would just keep moving through experiences and relationships. And so we did a regression back to the cause of this, what he labeled willfulness. And that was perfect for him. Like this, walk around, willful. And so he's back there, and he's just been sent out of the Godhead. And he's standing there out in the cosmos, his own cosmos, and he sees this whole line arcing of globes, spheres, one after another, reaching way out, hundreds of them, or at least 100. And they're all his lifetimes to come, filled with willfulness. And the Mother of God is standing over, I'm sorry?
So that's a motivator to change.
Well, you would think. There's more. So the Mother of God is standing over next to my client's right. Client's named Jim. And Mother of God says to Jim, now, you know, Jim, this is not necessary. And Jim goes, I will do it. And off he goes. Okay. Any questions so far?
Who's the Mother of God?
Ask. Ask her.
I'm just a baby woods here.
I understand. I don't have the answer for you. But you can come to it in yourself by asking about her.
I didn't know there was one.
Yeah, well, you could say it's an aspect of the divine. You know, many aspects, many faces, many elements. Mothering, mother is one aspect. Could the sanskaras be related to like a group soul or group consciousness? I am aware of the collective consciousness of souls, like for instance around in the Jews in the period between the First and the Second World War, and how their fear that they all held in common was something that was exploited by the occult in Hitler's charge. So they had collective responsibility, and as someone was suggesting last night, that the experience for all of those to have that, you could think of the potential for that as having been karmic. You know, that a whole collection of souls had acquired certain experiences together or and individually, that if they lived out this thing, then some of this would be cleared. So, but I'm just surmising. I'm not speaking from knowing it. So it's a good question and I don't know. Okay, now, just have to look at my notes. This is my book, the outline. It's a good book. It is. Okay, so this principle of applying divine presence or light into trauma, you can use wherever your creative thinking might take you. So I've done it for lots of events for people in this lifetime. I described the child in the core transformation example, okay? But if you have a client who has a lot of trauma and you want to clear it out from this lifetime, you may not be clearing the causal events, the causal lifetimes where they acquired the pattern, but certainly you can bring relief and help them have a shift in their sense of well-being and feeling loved instead of beaten up all the time. So you have the client, they may have conscious recall of it, then you have them go to that event in this life as appropriate. You know, you're not going to take somebody back into a sexual abuse event and then we'll just deepen into that feeling there, you know, not going there, right? Or they're being bullied so that they're frightened for their life. Have them be in the catharsis around that as is appropriate, and be sensitive and simple about it, and you can't push the river. Just can't happen. So, but let's say you have a client who's back in an event. It might be in emotional abuse. It's very common to cause a whole shift in a person dealing with emotional abuse by a parent by having them be in it, say they're 4 or 5 years old. And one of the beings I work with is called the Angel of Love of the Heavenly Mother. You go, well, how do you know that? And I said, it's hard to tell you how I know that, but it works, or she works. Every time when a client's in this and they're going, and they're having a hard time, and they're in the scene, and they're 4 years old, or 7, or 12, I ask the Angel of Love of the Heavenly Mother to come in and touch this one and be with them in that state where they are right now. And then, it's gone. Or a bubble appears of protection around them. The perpetrator can't hurt them. The bully is stunned. Or they may end up having compassion for the bully, because that's the nature of being impressed with divine presence. Yes?
When you're doing the session, and you're, of course, seeing how things unfold, how are you deciding or perceiving whose help you should ask for? Like whether it's the heart of Elijah or who else?
Right. If it's a child, I ask for the Angel of Love, for the feminine, for the mother aspect to come in. If it's a single incident, I may use Angels of the White Light, just a collective invocation, or Heart of Elijah. If there seems to be something where the client is stuck, you know, they get into this thing and it's not moving, could be this life or another life, then I usually ask Elijah to come in. Now, also, when people get stuck, there's often attachments involved. So that takes you into a whole other area. And of course, I use angels to clear out attachments. I may use Elijah to come into the place of vulnerability if there was an agreement between the incoming or the attached dark being or attached earthbound spirit in a prior life or this life. For instance, kind of a classic, I had a guy who was 35, recovering alcoholic, and his father was an alcoholic and would come home after work every day and beat the crap out of him. That was a regular daily experience. So by the time he was 6 or 7, he was cowering in the basement like this, awaiting his father's return home from work. And prayed and prayed to Christian God as he understood it, and nothing happened. No protection came. So he asked the devil to come in. Of course, the devil would, sure. You know, came in and stayed with him until he was in my office, 30 years later. And then so we went back to that period because that demon wasn't going to leave until the client was ready and free in himself so that he didn't need it anymore. So regress back to that period just before the dark one came in and had him be in that event and so forth. And then I call on Angel or Elijah to come in and touch this child in that experience, and it transmutes. And then we had to do more work around relationship with Dad, which became very successful for him. And then when you do that, when you have a trauma event in a prior life or in childhood that draws the attachment of a dark being or an earthbound spirit with dark ones attached, then and you're here in this life. When did you come in? Oh, been with him for lifetimes. Can't let him know what he's really like. I'm going to be in his face all the time and mess with him. One of those characters. Just a second, and then, sorry, and so then you go back to where just before that wise guy came in, and bring healing to the propensity or the vulnerability, whatever it takes. so that that's not an issue. And then the dark one disappears from the client's history, does not show up. Okay, question.
Earlier in your presentation, you talked about spirit attachment. Is that what you're talking about now?
Uh-huh.
And if so, are you talking about, I mean, a spirit that just hasn't passed into the light?
Yes.
That's been hanging around for a
Yes,
while?
yes.
Okay. And when you talk about a demon, are you just talking about, you know, a negative spirit?
One that's not a human spirit, whose function is to keep humans from their own light.
Oh, okay. And so, I mean, do you run into this on a
All the
regular
time.
basis?
Oh, yeah,
Whoa. Okay.
Common.
There you have it.
common. It's just,
They're
Thank you.
everywhere, they're everywhere.
it's true. Yeah, it's just very usual.
I have a real hard time with that.
Okay?
If God is everything, and we believe that God is everything, there is no thing other than God. What exactly are you calling a demon?
Someone who is a reflection of the belief that we all hold, mostly unconsciously, of separation from the divine. Yes,
Then it's an illusion.
but it's a reflection of our collective belief in
And
separation.
I understand that.
Okay.
And it's an illusion. So I don't want to give any energy to it as if it is anything other than illusion.
That's fine. You can choose to work that way. My experience is that lots of people have dark ones attached to them, and the wonder of it is when you clear them out, a shift happens in how they feel in themselves. Someone who might have been angry or aggravating all the time or pissing and moaning, and you uncover and work with them that there's some little blob in their heart that's dark and has been there for 20 years, and you clear it out using angels of the white light, all of a sudden they go, whew, I feel lighter. So, yes.
Do you find that when you do that work, Greg, that the demons also are sometimes lifted into the light?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
That there's healing
That's
there
what
as
happens.
well.
Yes. Let's be clear about that, and I've done this with dark ones, and I know what happens to them when I don't do something. You can, this is, some of you may go, I'm not ready for this one. Okay, but if you first ask the angels of the white light to envelop the dark one in a web of pure white light, then you've got their undivided attention, and they're not going to have the same attitude. Usually they have a very bad attitude, okay? Then you can say, I just want you to look into the center of your being. You can do this. And they go, well, I don't want to go in there, it's no good. Or you want me to find my own light, I know what you're doing, things like that. And then you say, well, that's okay. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. But if you want, just take a look in there and see what you notice. And then, well, it's all red and scary. Okay, now go through the scary. What do you come to next? Oh, well, there's a light in there. What does it feel like? Well, it's small, but it feels warm. Okay, go more deeply into that. And they start to transform in the room. Okay? And now, how are you, Mr. Dark Person? How are you doing? Talk to them like, and they go, well, I feel entirely different. Anything you want to say to my client here about how you feel? I am so sorry. They always, if you do that, 85% of the time, I mean, it takes work to do it, they come to remorse for how they have mistreated, misled, misguided the client. I've been told that that is the same process that they come to when you ask the angels of the white light to take them into the light. Why would it be otherwise? Cast thee into outer darkness. They already are the darkness. You know? So, but that's their illusion, to use Andrea's word. Their belief in that they're bad and they're no good and they're just out to screw everybody and that's their job, and that you got to be afraid of the light. They'll lie to you about the light, they were told. You know, they've all been programmed in that. It's almost as if creation, which is an act, took all of our fears, all of our souls, states of fear, and went, let's make a baseball team out of this energy, you know, because it's their energy. I mean, us, reflected as if there were a dualistic universe, as if there were good and bad, night and day, dark and evil. Not that there is, but as if there were, because when we first came out, we went, oh shit. Oh my God. And meanwhile, God is still inside. You know, what did he say? Put himself where we would never think to look? Yes.
These dark guys that attach themselves, would they have a relationship with the soul, or it's like, I'm just going to hop on board and make this soul's life?
Well, kind of both, but it's really the soul perceives a relationship with the dark ones.
Oh.
Or not. It may be they just hopped on board. There are a lot of those that just, you know, you walk into a bar, have too many beers, and you walk out with a lot of friends you hadn't invited. Dark ones, alcoholic earthbound.
Oh, okay,
you know.
but the individual, the soul has to be open to that. If I
Well,
got
let's say-
myself covered in white light or whatever, I'm just going to assume that that's not going to happen.
That's a good assumption. And by assuming that, you will be in a preventative mode. The best thing is to live your life to the fullest from the self on out, and be devotional about it to your God in your way, so that your heart becomes that same heart and you have that relationship. Then they don't want to bother with you. They wish they could, but they can't get in. Your atmosphere is somewhat impenetrable in that state. So the more you devote your life to being in union inside, then they just won't show up. It's not like they don't, you know, no, can't go see her. Anybody else I can, you know. And then there may be relationship that where someone sold their soul to the devil. That happens. Where the person's in a vulnerable place. Let's say that they were abandoned and they're pissed off about it, and they grow up and they're 18 years old and it's a female and they want that guy over in the next forest in their medieval village life, and he has shunned her, and she's pissed off, and she goes to see the witch, the local witch, and says, can you help me? Oh, sure, my dear. No, just do these things and come into my realm and hang out with me. And she attaches in that relationship her energy to the young girl, gets the boyfriend for her. Then the young girl finds out the boyfriend is not a good piece of work and is all upset. But by that time, she's held tight by the witch. And so the witch dies and attaches permanently to the young girl who's now 40 years old, and then goes on into other incarnations. The witch drops off and reattaches, witch drops off and reattaches. Yeah. Until that attitude that she had in the beginning, that vulnerability is healed. Then there's no function for the witch to try and control the client anymore.
When you encounter a human discarnate entity attachment, to what extent do you try to determine with your client if there's some sort of prearrangement, a karmic issue going back, and also do you ever try to do past life work with the attachments?
Maybe. It depends on the connection between the client, the host, and the earthbound spirit. Common experience, I mean, kind of a model was, there was a male client who had an earthbound spirit attached, and the earthbound spirit had been his brother in a prior life hundreds of years ago. And they had vowed always to protect each other and be with each other. I will always be with you. That's a common vow that some of us make in lifetimes, in romance or in brotherhood, family. So when the brother in that life died, he attached to the client in that life. And then, so we went back to that dependency and protective relationship and brought healing to it for both of them in that lifetime. And then the brother that had attached repeatedly was free to go. So the client was no longer unconsciously holding on to the brother, and the brother didn't need to protect him anymore. Another divine presence that I use is the planning period. Planning period. Why would you use that? Because if you go back far enough in the planning period, you're in a very high divine state. There's minimal intrusion by the egoic minding of the soul that's starting to emerge prior to coming down. Okay, so there's clarity, there's usually blue, there's peace, there's I feel good inside, I have no body. And so you can use that as a resource. I often do it with clients that are not believing in reincarnation because I want to bring them an experience that'll kind of blow their minds spiritually around their concepts, but something that they might be able to, well, you know, they're in trance state, planning period, I have no idea what that is, but they're in this feeling state of, instead of the trauma that they were in at age 4 in this life, they're back in this higher state. And in effect, they're in the light, but in a place in their soul's evolution where there's clarity and connectedness inside with their own inner being, with the self. And so then I'll say now, after they've been in that for a few minutes, let's carry that back into that place of either conception, which sometimes I visit, or the womb. Notice the impact of the state of the planning period upon that event. What happens? Oh, well, my parents are getting along just fine. And there's love. And I feel safe and I feel loved, contrary to abandonment, you know. So again, there's a transmutation that takes place by using the higher state.
Greg, how young can you regress a person?
I think the earliest I've done is 11 or 12. And I use a whole different approach for children under that. I do surrogate work, which scares some people, but works pretty well. In the beginning of my book, there's a story that I camouflaged. It was actually a boy, an 8-year-old, who was a mess. He'd been adopted after a year and a half being with drug-using parents and lots of domestic violence, and just never bonded with the adoptive mom, and had been to a number of psychiatrists and had different diagnoses and different medications. They were changed once a year. So I met him, the mom whom I had done work with one-on-one, brought him in, and I just looked at him and connected with him, you know. And then I scheduled about a week later a remote session with a surrogate who was a friend of mine, a colleague, who was very intuitive, and psychic and present and had no agenda. And we called for, put her into trance, and then in my office, and then called for the presence, the spirit of the boy who lived in the mountains in Colorado. Cleared out attachments, cleared out the experience of violence when he was in the womb and in the first year and a half, and did one past life regression in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and the next day he was fine.
And he wasn't participating at all?
No, he still doesn't know. But he, all the symptoms that he had of his aggression in the classroom, his depression in the morning, his attitude towards parents, adoptive family, that everything was gone.
This is in your book?
It's the story in the prologue, except it's described as a girl. Yep.
I may have missed it. Did you describe how he initially asked for this, or somebody asked?
The mother did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, on rare occasions, I'll have a grandmother, say, would you take care of my grandchild, or another parent. Actually, I do quite a bit these days for children who are 12 or younger. And the parents ask me, and I may know the child, and I may ask the child, do you want me to do some magic for you so you feel better? Yeah. Okay, so now when you go home, the first thing you're going to do is rewrite how you work with people, and feel really amazed by it. People come out of these experiences at the end of a session and they're stoned. You know what I mean? Like they just took acid. I don't mean any disrespect, but that's how often clients feel when they come out after being in divine presence for a while and trauma has been cleared out or transmuted. So that is the self coming through, having had at least one veil of illusion or allusion cleared that was a sanskara. So in that way, it is a pathway, not the, but a pathway to self-realization for people that want to pursue it in that, with that kind of consciousness about how this world we put there. And if there's something about us in it that makes us disgruntled or angry or pissed off or rejected, it's our movie, and we can bring healing to it, and this is one way. That's it.